It was my first time in Haiti. I've been to Cuba. I've been on a lot of mission trips overseas, but it was certainly eye-opening for me to go and experience what you probably know is a pretty impoverished country. It's one of the poorest in the Western Hemisphere, one of the poorest in the world, one of the most corrupt governments in the world, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. We got into Cap Haitian. We flew into Port-au-Prince, got on a puddle jumper type of airplane, and flew across the island to Cap Haitian, where our missionaries in Zunga and Kihome are serving in that area. And we got into Cap Haitian, and I just remember the smell. The reason is because unlike here, where we bag up our garbage and stick it out on the curb and pay somebody to come every week and take it somewhere where it disappears from our sight and where we don't get to see it, have to see it or smell it, they don't have that. So what happened was we were driving in the car from the airport, and what you see in every ditch, on every side of the road, on every curb is just garbage. It's everywhere. When nobody picks it up and there's nowhere to take it, you just throw it outside somewhere. And among that garbage, one were goats, which was weird, walking around, but also children playing in it, rifling through it, looking for stuff, spending their time walking around the trash. Now, gratefully, I can say that since I was there, the next year, another group from our church went, and much of that was cleaned up thanks to a good president that was doing good things for the country. But when I was there, the smell I can't even describe to you of garbage everywhere. Now in Haiti also, because of the poverty there, many of those kids don't eat more than maybe one meal a day of mostly rice. Diabetes is a huge problem because if they don't have other foods, they either can find fruit, which is full of sugar, or sugar cane, which grows in the fields. And they would just go out and just chew on sugar cane all the time because they're hungry. And the problem with that is they eventually begin to have a problem with type 2 diabetes because they're just chewing on sugar cane all the time and not getting the nourishment that they need. So I remember coming home and looking at the way that we live. And you know, I wasn't so embarrassed about the way that we live here until one of our translators from Haiti, who's a doctor, came to the United States and came to our community. And he came to our house, and we were living in the church parsonage. It was a 5-bedroom, 3.5-bath house. It was huge. And he looked around in this house and said, "You live here with just your family?" As he lived in a village with his father and grandfather and aunt, and they only had a ceiling over part of it. And I thought, oh man. I came home and came home to our culture where our kids think that being hungry is we haven't had a snack for 20 minutes, right? And I started doing that thing that parents do when they didn't want to finish their dinner or eat what Katie made for supper, or, we're looking for another snack, and I started going, kids in Haiti only get to eat once a day, maybe. And they're lucky if it's anything that they want to eat. You don't know how lucky you have. I heard that growing up too. Like, there are kids in Africa that are starving. There are kids in somewhere, somebody's starving, and we need to eat our food. And it made me very conscious of our waste. We're really more conscious of it now, I think, anyway. We recycle. We talk about turning the water off more. We talk about turning our lights off. We talk about trying to take care of the earth and the resources that we have. That's better than it was when I was a kid, and that's positive. Certainly today on Earth Day, we recognize the impact that we have on the world, that not everyone has what we have. So it's odd that in some circumstances, Jesus looks wasteful. We've been going through these bad habits of Jesus, things that Jesus did that from the outside kind of look like, wait a minute, are you serious? We looked at how Jesus was a procrastinator last week, how he took his time coming to heal his friend Lazarus. And if he would have just gone faster, he could have healed him, but Jesus had a reason to do that and took his time on purpose. Talked about how Jesus sometimes doesn't do things the way we think he should, and today, Jesus looks wasteful. And I want to look at just three different stories. Three stories about why and how he got that reputation. Jesus wasted his time, he wasted his power, and he wasted his treasure. Certainly, if you look at it from the outside. Three stories. First one out of Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. You're welcome to turn there if you want. This is what it says. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." One of my favorite stories in the Bible, because it allows me to say to my wife, or when I was a kid, my mother, I'm doing the right thing, not helping you out around the house. Because Mary is the one that was right. It's a weird story. Jesus comes to their house and Martha is trying to do the hostess thing, the right thing, that I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to do all the things that will make you feel welcome in my home. And Mary is doing nothing. She's sitting at his feet, listening to him, talking to him, being there with him. And in this culture, in this country, we value work, right? We value going to work, doing what needs to be done. And it seems that Jesus values our presence. You know, this is tough in the church. So often we really want to we want to earn God's favor. We want to serve in so many ways. And yet Jesus in this story, he's not as interested in serving, way more interested in presence. This week I was telling my Sunday school class about this pastor's conference I went to this week, and we learned from Dr. Jolene Erlacher, who is an expert in generational studies. And so she looks at the different generations and kind of how they work together, and especially her focus is on the millennial generation and Generation Z. So millennials born in the early 80s through about the mid-90s. Any of you in here millennials? It's okay. You don't have to be ashamed. Next, Generation Z, born in the mid-90s to about 2010. Any Generation Z people in here? Most of my kids and a lot of our kids are Generation Z. And she's looking at the ways that those generations impact perspective. And what was so interesting about it was, I'm kind of right on the line. I'm a tail end of the Generation X, kind of the beginning of millennial. I identify as a Generation Xer in terms of my point of view, typically. But as Generation X and Boomers and Busters, Builders, Silent, they're called all sorts of things, the World War II generation as well. We had pastors from all those generations. We had some later retired pastors. We had lots of Boomers, mostly Boomers. A few of us Gen Xers and some Millennials. But as we're learning about the generations, one of the things we learned was Millennials especially value time with their family over and above work. And that is a shift from our cultural values in America. Because what used to be the value was you go and you work and you do what needs to be done to bring home the bacon for your family. And the way you express love to your family is by providing for them. Millennials today and Generation Z today, their perspective is, I show love to my family by being with my family. I hate to tell you this, boomers. Jesus might have been a millennial, or at least a lot closer to that perspective. Because his interest was in presence, not work. What that means for us is, his desire is to know you and to live this life with you, not to have you just do everything for it. Our job is not to validate our salvation by work. What Jesus wants from us is presence. Now, does that mean we never work? No. Does it mean we never serve? No, of course not. But he values our presence. We see that in his time wasting with Mary. We see it in his people time wasting too. We certainly see that he was criticized for hanging out with people that others would say do not deserve his time. Drunks, tax collectors, sinners, people that he should not have spent his time with. He had more important stuff to do. And yet, he had this bad habit, spending time with people that didn't deserve it. Second thing, he wasted his power. John 2, another phenomenal story. Beginning of his ministry. John 2, 1-11 says this. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. What a weird way to start his ministry. His first miracle, really. You know, you think his ministry started with going to the desert and being tempted, or going and being baptized by John, but really it started when his mom said, "Hey Jesus, I need your help." And what I love about that encounter is Mary comes to Jesus and says, "There's a problem, you need to fix it." And Jesus says, "Mom, my time has not yet come. This is not what I'm here for." She didn't even bother to respond. She just turned to the servants and said, "Do whatever he says." Jesus had a mom, right? So he does. I love this story because it's so weird that he would turn water into wine to save face for the family that's throwing a party for a wedding. You know, a wedding party back then was not one day. You think we have parties in this country for weddings. This was like a week-long festival that they had to provide for everybody, for all their guests, for all this time. Food and drink and party and stuff. And it's a big deal. It's hard. It's expensive. It's a deal. Jesus comes to this thing, and this is not the kind of miracle we expect, right? We expect him to feed people, 5,000, 4,000, whatever, feed people. We expect him to heal people. He's, letting the blind see and healing the crippled and healing the paralyzed. We even expect him to raise people from the dead, as he did with Jairus' daughter and Lazarus. Last week we talked about those. We expect all that stuff. Water to wine, really? We're Baptists. We don't expect him to turn water to wine. But here's the thing. He doesn't. He wastes his power on doing something so seemingly frivolous. But here's what he does. He does good for the hosts of the party. You know, sometimes sometimes doing good for people, even when it doesn't look Jesus-y, is okay. Is a good use of our time. Doing good for people, even when it doesn't look like church, can be a good use of our time. The second piece of that I love about that story is it's a great image of what Jesus came to do. Because what did he turn to when they needed some wine? A bunch of water used for ritual cleaning as a part of the Jewish faith and tradition. So here's what Jesus says. Oh, I see these things holding water for ceremonial cleaning. You don't need that anymore because I'm here now. I'm going to take that and turn it into something different. I love that image because we realize that because of Jesus, we don't need that ceremonial cleaning anymore. We don't need that ritual cleaning anymore. We don't need the hoops that we jump through in order to be clean before God, because Jesus is about to do all that for us. Waste is power, and yet does good. Finally, last one. He wastes his treasure. Jay read for us earlier the story, and it's often a familiar one. Jesus is at the table. Again, Mary, once again, is involved in this one. And as they're at the table, Mary takes this incredibly expensive perfume, pours it on his feet, and begins to anoint him. And then he wipes it with her hair. Imagine the humility required for her to come and take something so precious, put it on his feet of all things, and then wipe it, dry it with her own hair. And of course Judas responds like, are you kidding me? Think of how many poor people we could have helped with the cost of that perfume. You're wasting treasure on something as ridiculous as cleaning your feet when we could have been helping the poor. Of course we know, John tells us, Judas didn't care about the poor. He just didn't like wasting money on stuff like that because he could skim it off the top later. Jesus says, you will have the poor with you always. But it was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will not always have me. Again, weird. Because we know Jesus cares about the poor. He talks highly about the poor way more than he talks about the rich. In fact, when he talks about the rich, it's usually not so good. He's talking about how it's so hard for the rich to make it into the kingdom of heaven that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Therefore, he raises the poor. But does not God deserve our very best? Sometimes we think so thriftily, even about our faith, that we don't offer to God our best. Mary took what she had that was her best, and she gave it to Jesus. And in doing so, she prepared him, as he said, for the day of his burial. She prepared for what he was to come. What do these habits mean for us? Important things. Jesus valued our presence over our work, and he still does. That needs to affect how we do things and what we plan. It also means that we need to value people over our own plans too. That like Jesus, we need to value presence with his creation, with the people around us, over where I've got to be and what I'm supposed to be doing, if we want to follow him as a disciple. We learn in this that all of our lives are sacred. There isn't this, in this world, we've kind of broken things. Some things are sacred, some things are secular. We kind of try not to mess that up. But Jesus shows us, even a party is an opportunity to see the glory of God at work, right? Even a party is an opportunity to do good for somebody that's in a bind. And so the reality is, no matter where you go, it's all sacred. Everything we do has the opportunity to be for the glory of God and his kingdom. And so everything we do for him. So don't let that separation that we've created affect the way that we live. Instead, go and do good in all things. Finally, it tells us that God deserves our absolute best. That doesn't mean we forget the poor. Not at all. What it means is that we are called to give God what is best of us. Best of our lives, best of what we have, best of who we are, because he deserves it. And when we do that, then out of that will come everything else.